In the early 19th century, Edinburgh was a hub for groundbreaking anatomy teaching by educators like Alexander Monro, John Bell, John Goodsir, and Robert Knox, leading to its prominence in anatomical studies, along with Leiden and Padua. The study of anatomy, crucial for surgery, required cadavers, leading to a shortage due to the growing demand. Scottish law allowed dissection of certain corpses, but legal supply couldn't meet demand, resulting in an underground trade of stolen bodies. Legal ambiguities complicated the situation. Disturbing graves was a crime, as was taking items from the deceased, but stealing the body itself wasn't illegal. The cost per body varied by season, being higher in winter due to greater demand and better preservation conditions. In the 1820s, public protests emerged against grave robbing, prompting families to hire guards, use protective measures like stone slabs or iron cages, and leading to a crisis among anatomists due to cadaver shortages. Historian Ruth Richardson notes a growing crisis atmosphere, while Tim Marshall highlights that Burke and Hare, infamous murderers, exploited the situation by killing for profit, representing a dark climax of the grave robbing issue. Born in 1792 in Innie, County Tyrone, Ireland, William Burke was one of two sons born to middle-class parents. Together with his brother Constantine, he enjoyed a comfortable upbringing and both embarked on careers in the British Army during their teenage years. Serving in the Donegal militia, Burke's life took a turn when he married a woman from County Mayo. The marriage, however, was short-lived, and in 1818, following a dispute with his father-in-law over land, Burke abandoned his wife and family. He relocated to Scotland and took up work as a labourer, contributing to the construction of the Union Canal. Eventually settling in the quaint village of Maddiston near Falkirk, Burke established a household with Helen McDougall, affectionately known as Nellie, who became his second wife. After several years and the completion of canal projects, the couple moved to Tanner's Close in Edinburgh in November 1827. Transitioning into a life of trading, they engaged in selling second-hand clothing to the local underprivileged population. Burke later pursued a career as a cobbler, finding moderate success and earning around £1 per week. Renowned within the community for his industriousness and cheerful demeanor, he often entertained his clientele by singing and dancing while tending to their footwear. Despite his Roman Catholic upbringing, Burke became a regular attendee of Presbyterian religious gatherings held in the Grassmarket area. His commitment to worship was unwavering, and he frequently carried a Bible, becoming an integral part of his public image. The exact birthplace of William Hare remains uncertain, with possible origins in County Armagh, County Londonderry, or Newry. His birth year and age are shrouded in mystery. Upon his 1828 arrest, he claimed to be 21 years old, but historical sources suggest his birth may have occurred between 1792 and 1804. While details about his early life are sparse, there's a likelihood that he toiled as an agricultural labourer in Ireland before venturing to Britain. For 7 years, he contributed his labour to the construction of the Union Canal before relocating to Edinburgh in the mid-1820s, assuming the role of a coalman's assistant. Hare found lodgings in Tanner's Close, under the roof of a man named Logue and his wife, Margaret Laird, situated in the Westport vicinity of the town. Following Logue's demise in 1826, Hare potentially entered a marital union with Margaret. Contemporary records portray Hare, as depicted by historian Brian Bailey in his account of the murders, as illiterate and uncouth, a lean, pugnacious, aggressive, and morally ambiguous individual, bearing visible scars from past wounds upon his head and brow. Margaret, also hailing from Ireland, is described as a rough-featured and morally corrupt woman. In the year 1827, Burke and McDougall journeyed to Penicuik in Midlothian for harvest work, where they encountered Hare. A camaraderie developed among the men, leading Burke and McDougall to return with Hare to Edinburgh. The duo settled into Hare's dwelling within Tanner's Close, and the two couples soon gained notoriety for their heavy drinking and rowdy behaviour. On the 29th of November in 1827, Donald, a lodger residing in Hare's dwelling, passed away due to dropsy shortly before receiving an army pension that was in arrears by £4 for unpaid rent. This unfortunate financial setback was lamented by Hare to Burke, leading the two to devise a plan. They resolved to sell Donald's deceased body to a local anatomist. A coffin was obtained from a carpenter, intended for burial, with the parish covering the expenses. However, the plan took a sinister turn as the coffin was tampered with. Burke and Hare removed Donald's body, concealed it beneath a bed, and filled the coffin with tanner's bark. At nightfall, on the scheduled burial day, they transported the corpse to Edinburgh University, seeking a buyer. Professor Monro was their intended target, but a student directed them to Knox's establishment in Surgeon Square instead. While dealing initially with assistants, it was Knox who ultimately settled on a price of £7.10 for the body. Hare received £4.5, and Burke received the remaining £3.5, intended to offset Hare's loss from unpaid rent. According to Burke's later account, as they left the university, an assistant indicated that the anatomists would be interested in future transactions. The chronology of the subsequent murders is ambiguous. Burke provided two conflicting confessions regarding the sequence. The first was an official statement in January 1829, while the second was an interview with the Edinburgh Courant published in February 1829. Hare's account differed, yet they agreed on many aspects. Modern sources, such as works by Brian Bailey, Lisa Rossner, and Owen Dudley Edwards, present varying sequences or adopt historical versions. The initial murder, possibly occurring in January or February 1828, involved a miller named Joseph or salt seller Abigail Simpson, with Rossner leaning toward Joseph. Subsequent victims included an English male lodger, an elderly woman, and a woman known as Mary Patterson. These acts of violence continued, with Burke and Hare killing Margaret Laird Haldane and her daughter, and Dougal, among others. Daft Jamie, a mentally disabled beggar, also fell victim, followed by James Wilson, and eventually Margaret Docherty. In total, 16 individuals were murdered by Burke and Hare. Throughout these events, Burke and Hare often operated while intoxicated, their actions driven by their grim circumstances. Burke's later statements revealed his dependence on alcohol and opium to cope with his guilt. On the 3rd of November in 1828, a warrant was issued for the apprehension of Burke, Hare, and their respective wives, while Broughton was released without further legal action. The four suspects were held separately, providing statements that contradicted their initial responses on the day of their arrests. After Docherty's body was examined by police surgeon Alexander Black, forensic specialists Robert Christison and William Newbigin were appointed to assess the situation. They concluded that suffocation was likely the cause of death, though definitive medical evidence was lacking. Basing their decision on the forensic report, authorities charged both the Burkes and Hares with murder. During his investigation, Christison interviewed Knox, who admitted to having purchased bodies from poor lodging houses. Although Knox's ethics were questioned, there was no evidence of criminal wrongdoing. While law enforcement was confident that murder had occurred and that at least one of the four was involved, securing a conviction proved challenging. Suspicions of additional murders arose, but the absence of bodies hindered further inquiries. Media coverage exacerbated the situation, as sensational and inaccurate stories led the public to assume more widespread victimization. A breakthrough came when Janet Brown identified her friend Mary Patterson's clothing, and a local baker recognized clothing worn by Jamie Wilson, which was being worn by Burke's nephew. The Lord Advocate, Sir William Ray, employed a common strategy by targeting one individual to obtain a confession that could implicate the others. Hare was chosen, and on December 1 he was offered immunity in exchange for becoming a witness for the prosecution. Hare provided a comprehensive confession detailing all the deaths, resulting in formal charges being filed against Burke and McDougall for the murders of Patterson, Wilson, and Docherty. Notably, Knox faced no charges due to Burke's statement exonerating him. As news of the case spread, public opinion turned against Knox, with many in Edinburgh considering him a manipulative orchestrator of the crimes. The term burking emerged to describe suffocation or anatomy murder, and a popular rhyme circulated through the city. Up the close and down the stair. But and Ben, why Burke and Hare? Burke's the butcher, Hare's the thief. Knox, the boy that buys the beef. The trial commenced at 10 a.m. on Christmas Eve in 1828 within Edinburgh's Parliament House, overseen by the High Court of Justiciary. Presiding over the proceedings was Lord Justice Clerk David Boyle, assisted by Lords Meadowbank, Pitmilly, and Mackenzie. By 9 a.m., the court was packed, and a sizable crowd gathered outside, prompting a deployment of 300 constables to prevent disturbances. Infantry and cavalry were also on standby for additional security measures. The trial continued uninterruptedly through the day and night, with Rossner noting that even a formal break for dinner could have raised doubts about the trial's integrity. A delay in proceedings due to objections about trying Burke and McDougall together was rigorously debated. The defense argued that the accused were facing unrelated charges, prompting the judge to decide that the indictment should be separated into distinct charges for each murder. The choice was given to the prosecutor, who opted for the Docherty murder due to the strength of the evidence. Burke and McDougall pleaded not guilty to the murder of Docherty in the early afternoon. A list of 55 witnesses was prepared, including Hare and Knox, though not all were called to testify. One of Knox's assistants, David Patterson, affirmed that Burke and Hare had provided the doctor with multiple bodies. Hare, later in the day, took the stand and testified that Burke had been the sole perpetrator of Docherty's murder, asserting that McDougall had only been involved in bringing Docherty back to the house twice. Margaret Hare followed, presenting her testimony while caring for her coughing infant daughter. The final prosecution witnesses were Doctors Black and Christensen, who expressed suspicions of foul play but lacked definitive forensic evidence. The defense did not present any witnesses, relying instead on pre-trial declarations from Burke and McDougall. Summations were delivered, with Burke's defense attorney addressing the jury until the early hours of Christmas Day. The jury retired at 8:30 a.m. on Christmas Day and returned less than an hour later with a guilty verdict for Burke in the Docherty case. However, the same charge against McDougall was deemed not proven. Upon delivering the death sentence to Burke, Justice Boyle included a solemn declaration. "Your body should be publicly dissected and anatomized. And I trust that if it is ever customary to preserve skeletons, yours will be preserved, in order that posterity may keep in remembrance of your atrocious crimes." After the trial concluded, McDougall was released and returned home. The next day, as she went to purchase whiskey, an enraged mob confronted her due to the not proven verdict. For her safety, she was taken to a nearby police facility in Fountainbridge. However, when the mob laid siege to the building, she managed to escape through a back window to the main police station on Edinburgh's High Street. Seeking to visit Burke, McDougall was denied permission and left Edinburgh the following day. Little is known about her subsequent life. On January 3, 1829, following advice from Catholic priests and Presbyterian clergy, Burke provided another confession. This detailed confession went beyond his previous pre-trial statement and attributed a significant portion of the blame for the murders to Hare. The release of Hare was met with protest. A petition on behalf of James Wilson's family opposing Hare's immunity and release from prison was thoroughly debated by the High Court of Justiciary. Ultimately, the petition was rejected by a 4-2 vote on January 16, 1829. Hare's wife, Margaret, was released on January 19 and made her way to Glasgow, seeking passage back to Ireland. However, she was recognized by a mob, prompting an attack. Eventually, she found shelter in a police station before being escorted onto a ship bound for Belfast. Her fate after arriving in Ireland remains uncertain. Burke met his fate on the morning of January 28, 1829, as he was hanged in front of a potentially 25,000-strong crowd. Views from nearby tenement windows overlooking the scaffold were rented at various prices. On February 1, Burke's body was publicly dissected by Professor Monro at the university's Old College Anatomy Theatre. The event caused a commotion as students demanded access to the limited ticket lecture, resulting in a minor riot. Monro wrote with Burke's blood during the dissection, leaving a chilling message. Burke's skeleton found its way to the Anatomical Museum of the Edinburgh Medical School, where it remains as of 2022. His death mask and a book allegedly bound with his tanned skin can be observed at Surgeons' Hall Museum. Hare was released on February 5, 1829, and was aided in leaving Edinburgh in disguise aboard a mail coach to Dumfries. However, he was recognized by fellow passengers, and a crowd gathered upon his arrival. Escaping through a back window, he was placed in a carriage to the town's prison. He later disappeared from public view, and his fate remains unknown. Knox, who had faced suspicions and criticism, declined to comment on his involvement with Burke and Hare. Accused by the public of complicity, he was ridiculed in caricature, and his house was targeted in a demonstration where an effigy of him was burned. An inquiry committee absolved him of complicity, stating that there was no evidence that Knox or his assistants were aware of the murders. Knox resigned from his museum curator position and faced increasing isolation from university life. Leaving Edinburgh in 1842, he lectured in various parts of the world. He died in 1862 after a career marked by controversies and challenges.